When people watch this film, in your experience showing it at festivals or during your theatrical run, did people ever mistake it for a real documentary?
Yes. I think one of the best and worst things about the film is that it's a fake documentary. I had originally intended to make a narrative documentary that I pretended was real, and I wanted to put it out to film festivals and have it play as a documentary. Never tell anyone that it was fake. However, what happens in the film, in which this filmmaker sort of exploits the characters and if not ruins their lives, impacts their lives, I discovered when I began test screening the film, when I was editing, that it made audiences so angry by the end that they were no longer laughing at the funny stuff. So I realized what I had to do was make the last reel of the film reveal that it was fake, so that the audience could enjoy the fact that these were actors and they were okay, and that some of their lives hadn't been ruined by the filmmaking. I think the audience felt complicitous in invading the people's lives otherwise. So I had to tack on this thing at the end that made it seem, that announced it was a fake documentary. Then it played in film festivals as a narrative film, but much to my amazement, large parts of the audience seemed to buy tickets to things. Oh, it's about sex on the internet. And they would buy tickets, they'd go to see it, and they'd have no idea that they were watching a fiction film. They'd think it was a documentary. They hadn't really read the description in the program. So by the end of the film, half the audience would be furious and waiting to skewer the filmmaker during the Q&A. And then when this last reel of credits would come on, people would discover that it was fake. There'd be a lot of laughter and snorting and shouting, and the lights would come up and people would say, I can't believe this was fake, or, you know, there would be all kinds of reactions. But always at festivals, a good segment of the audience seems, you know, believed that it was a real documentary, until even some of them would miss the credits. The lights would come up and they'd raise their hand and say, "Where's the filmmaker?" And I'd say, "But didn't you see the credits? I'm the filmmaker. This is fake." And they would be astounded and sometimes angry, sometimes amused.
Why'd you make a fake doc?
Well, I didn't really want to make a fake doc. I shot the film in 1997 and early 1998. And at the time, I wanted to make a real documentary, but I realized I couldn't afford to make a documentary. I had this friend, Shinji, a Japanese kid who had moved to New York, who ran a sake bar in the East Village. And I'd see him and he'd tell me these funny stories about trying to pick up men on the internet. They would fly from other parts of the country or from Europe to meet him, and it would always end in ruin. So I thought about making a documentary about him, and when I budgeted it out, it simply would have been too expensive to make a documentary. So I decided to make a fictional documentary about this character, and I met a group of his friends, including somebody that Shino was based on, and slowly I expanded my original concept of my documentary, my fictionalized documentary, into the group of people that you see in the film. Secondly, once I thought more about making a fake documentary, I really liked this film, Chronicle of a Summer, by French filmmaker Jean Rouch. It was made in 1960, in which a documentary filmmaking team went out into the streets of Paris, stopped people on the street, and asked them, "How do you feel today?" and asked them questions about their lives. And they slowly developed a little group of characters in which the filmmaker and the camera crew and the subjects were all conscious of themselves and part of the film, and I wanted to borrow that whole notion and create a structure for my film.
So you mentioned deciding to make a fictional doc instead of making a real doc because of cost, but why don't you explain why a fictional doc would cost less than a real doc?
Good question. When you're making a real documentary, you don't know what's going to happen, so you have to be prepared to run the camera for days and days and days and weeks and months. At the time in 1997 when I was shooting in film. Video was really not quite inexpensive enough or advanced enough that I could make a doc or a fake doc in video. And film is very expensive to run in a documentary. And so the difference between an unknown number of shoot days and where you don't really know what's going to happen, and a script in which you know there are going to be scenes and they're going to be about something, is worlds apart. So instead of a potential 60 or 90 shoot days over the course of 6 months or a year, I was able to make the film in 10 days. 10 days scattered over a period of months, where 1 or 2 days a week, every month, I would get my actors and film 1 or 2 scenes.
Okay. So tell me about the actors.
Okay, this is the first film that I did not have a SAG contract for, and I had very low expectations for the kind of actors that I would find that didn't have a lot of experience. But I ran an ad in Backstage, which is an actors newspaper, casting newspaper, and I got 500 or 600 headshots. And it was so overwhelming, I wound up looking at each headshot for 5 seconds, and without looking at anyone's credits, I just picked the pictures I liked the best. And I saw 40 or 50 actors, and I was amazed at the terrific quality of the actors that I could get who were not SAG, and maybe didn't even have that much experience, but that had been struggling around New York for years and years, and had been trained, and were in off-Broadway plays, and I wound up with a terrific cast. A lot of them people I'd never met before, who were just excited to be in a movie.
Did you guys improvise a lot?
Yes and no.
Yes and no.
The question is, did we improvise a lot? The answer is yes and no. I wrote a 45-page treatment for this film, which is about 80 minutes long. Usually it's a page a minute. But I only wrote dialogue for scenes in which there were more than 3 characters. When someone was interviewed alone or with someone, generally I wrote the questions for the filmmaker, and we rehearsed the interviews, and I asked the actors to make up the answers in their own words. I gave them each a character sheet that explained who they were, their backstory, and kind of what their answers to questions would be, but not how to say their questions. And the reason for that is people don't, when you write dialogue, you write whole sentences, but when people speak in a documentary, they never speak in whole sentences. And the only way to really make it seem as though these actors were not actors, they were real people, was to not allow them to memorize lines.
Why'd you shoot it in the style you shot it in?
The visual style of the film is based on the idea that this filmmaker, who is inexperienced, just a kind of rich New York woman who wants to get into filmmaking, and is making a first documentary because it's easier than making a narrative. She didn't need a script. Basically, over the course of her filming, the fictional filmmaker's filming, which took place over 6 months or 9 months, had no kind of production management or producer or anybody who really knew what they were doing. So every time she had something new that she wanted to film, she'd hire up a new film crew, and I have no idea how she'd shot the last scene, had no idea, she had no concept of style. So instead, from week to week or month to month, there's absolutely no continuity in the visual style of the film. Now, that was my concept, that's my visual concept. The reality is I filmed it in color and black and white because I couldn't afford to get enough color film, and I couldn't afford to get enough black and white film. And I got the idea for tinting the black and white from the Godard film Contempt, which has a opening sequence that cycles through red, green, and yellow. No, red, blue, and yellow over black and white film, and it's a little more interesting than black and white.
Okay, cool. Anything else you want to add about the style of the film?
Oh, well, I also wanted to mix up the shooting style. I wanted to mix up the shooting style of the film, color and black and white, because I knew that most of my footage was going to be talking heads, people talking to the camera, and it's very hard to make that interesting looking. Also, I didn't have a lot of locations or a lot of backgrounds, so rather than go somewhere interesting to film them, I shot most of the film in my production office and just changed the tint of the stock, or I switched from black and white to color, or I stuck another poster in the background, or I aimed the camera in a different direction, and I used the color in black and white and graininess and lack of grain and the different kinds of lighting to make it visually interesting, as opposed to using locations.
What would you do differently if you were to shoot it today?
Well, if I shot it today, I wouldn't make a fake documentary, and I wouldn't make a film about the internet, because the internet has been done to death, and the internet, you experience it by going on the internet. You don't want to watch a documentary about the internet. And since I made the film in 1997, documentaries have become reality television. The whole reality television phenomenon has happened. And so there's 30 hours of programming a week on television of reality TV. And what I want to make now are kung fu movies, pirate movies, movies about teen witches, science fiction, things that are, they may be low budget, but that are not realism, that are flights of fancy and that have symbolic underpinnings and that are about dreams. Not interested in reality anymore since I made this film.